We are live. We are finally live. Our technology is finally working. And I'm here again with Aurelio Coronado Maris. Aurelio, what is the topic today?
Well, I think it's important for us to talk about the International Women's Day that is tomorrow, and some issues that are still in our community. You know, the forensic scientists, most of them don't understand most of the problems we have still, and we having in the future related to gender. What do you think about that?
I think it's totally true. I'll share with you a conversation that I just had with my wife on this very issue, because it actually bears repeating. And that is that many people look at things like Black History Month, International Women's Day, anything that has to do with recognizing somebody and giving them a special time. It's almost like, well, if we have to do this, then doesn't it show how far apart we are? And the answer is, of course, yes, it does. So this is I believe this is it's a recognition for how far apart we are and how far we have to go with respect to women's rights. But also, we're not really talking to educated people. We're talking to people who are uneducated and people who are in positions of power and authority who are still gender biased, even though they might not know it, as well as kids who are growing up and who may not understand the worth that they have or the opportunities they should have, right?
Yeah, obviously it's a big issue. You know, it's a great conversation who's every day. But the problem is that people tend to confuse the conversation and the everyday problems with the real issues that are related to crimes. I mean,
yes,
I don't believe violence, and maybe you don't believe with violence, but there's a lot of people who are living it daily, and because they have a specific gender, they get justice.
Right. Well, this is a really important point. We talk about in the United States, we talk about having really, we have like, what do we say? Those are first world problems. The joke is, we have these first world problems that we're always complaining about. And whenever I see someone, and I know this is wrong of me, but whenever I see someone who doesn't need therapy in therapy for their first world problems, I think to myself, oh my gosh, we have the money to spend on that kind of thing when they don't really need it, when they just need a friend or they just need a family just to be nice to other people. And instead they're just destroyed. They're eating themselves alive with their own problems. They're so self-obsessed. I find that to be troubling. But the reality is we have problems all over the world. People who are living every day with not only violence or the inability to get a job or to have food or with the possibility of being sexually assaulted, specifically because of their gender, whether it's in a particular community or it's in a particular country or in the confines of a particular justice system or courtroom.
Yeah, I would like to do a summary in Spanish. Can you put the video public so I can share and everybody can share?
It's not public?
No, it's not public, but I can talk in Spanish while you're doing that.
Okay, no problem.
Estamos hablando del Día Internacional de la Mujer y de los problemas relacionados con género. Dice el doctor que hay que hacer una diferenciación entre los problemas, digamos, públicos, los problemas más bien privados, cómo percibimos nuestra vida cotidiana y los problemas reales que están viviendo muchas personas que viven en la marginalidad. El género sigue siendo una variable que hace que se viva distinto, que se tenga acceso en particular a la justicia de manera distinta. Muchas mujeres en Latinoamérica y todavía en Estados Unidos y muchos países no tienen acceso al mismo sistema de justicia que tienen los hombres. En México en particular tenemos el problema de los feminicidios. En México no se investigan los feminicidios. 95% de ellos no tienen una investigación adecuada y muchos de ellos quedan impunes. So I'm talking about femicide,
right.
About how that, like one of the bigger problems we have, and how these crimes are being investigated. And we need to apply protocols because we have protocols.
Yeah. Well, what happens is, and this is what it comes down to. Yes, we have protocols. One, people have to be aware that they exist, that the proper investigative protocols exist. That's the first problem. That's the first challenge. Second challenge is that they have to understand that protocols exist not just as a good idea, but there's something that has to be followed in every case to keep your own biases from affecting the quality of the investigation that you do. And this has to be done irrespective of gender. You and I have worked with people, people like Alfredo Velasco, people like Manuel Esparza, people who are absolutely, completely gender biased. They have a dim view of women. They don't believe them when they make complaints. They don't like working with them. They're denigrating of them when they're not around, and they would prefer that they actually not have positions of power and authority. And for them, they see that population. Manuel is one way. He sees the population as something to protect because they're weaker and dumber, and men should be in charge. And Alfredo views them as a population to exploit for his own gain, which is, and I think those represent the spectrum.
Exactly, that's a spectrum of machismo.
Spectrum of machismo spectrum. That's a great idea. There it is, the machismo spectrum. That's mine. You can't have it. I'm taking it.
Yeah, and we talk about these two guys, but actually there's it's a structural problem.
Yes.
You know? It's not about their personalities. Obviously, the personality is one of the things we need to look up. But it's about how we understand the problem. And if you have someone who's saying, no, femicide, we don't need femicide because we can do proper investigation if we use homicide as an hypothesis. Well, they don't understand first science. They don't understand how the UN works and how constitutional institutions in our country are talking about this.
That's right.
Basically, if you don't talk in terms of gender, you are not an expert.
No.
And this is what's going on right now. It's not an option.
Right.
It's what you need to understand to do your job as supposed to do.
Well, here's a fun fact. I was doing my PhD at Bond University in between 2009 and 2012. Actually, finished it in 2011, but I had to do some more stuff in 2012. I had a thesis committee meeting halfway through to make sure I was following the right guidelines. And I had divided my data up between men and women, male forensic scientists and female forensic scientists, because I wanted to see whether or not there were gender differences. And this became the most contentious issue at my thesis meeting. And it was a female director of one of the university colleges. And she was, I don't know what her problem was, but she very much did not want the issue of gender looked at all. She said, oh, that's a slippery slope. That's a slippery slope. You start looking at that, and you start, people starting to say you're biased. People will say you're trying to, shape the data one way or the other, and it's going to create a difference where there isn't one. And I'm like, no, the whole point is to see if there is a difference. And if I'm a scientist and the only reason they wouldn't be doing gender is if I was gender biased, to hide the gender bias. So by examining the data related to gender, and you get to ask some interesting questions. And what she is saying is, by even creating data that allows you to ask the questions, you're gender biased. And I thought, that's about the dumbest thing I ever heard.
No, and that's the problem.
Right.
We need to assume that there's gender bias in the scientific community field, and especially in the forensics community. We have a machismo problem, and there's no question about that. So we need to put the gender bias into how we do investigation. If we're not doing that, we're not doing science. We're just covering problems.
And by the way, and let's be fair about this. Gender bias is a term that applies to anyone who is biased towards someone because of their gender, whether or not they share that gender. For example, I was watching a great series last night called National Treasure. It's a 4-part series about a very famous person who's accused of sexual assault and rape of different people. And the allegations are quite old, and he's being dragged through the press. And it stars Robbie Coltrane as this very beloved national figure in Britain. And he did an excellent job. But what it portrays is the same advice I give my clients in cases involving sexual assault. When you have a case involving sexual assault and you have a jury, what you want a jury to be comprised of is mostly females, if you're working for the defense. The reason why is because females never believe other females who are accusing other people of sexual assault. They just don't. What they'll do is they'll be more likely to acquit the defendant. If you have a white male jury, that jury will be more likely to convict because out of guilt, because they don't want to appear to be biased in their gender. Females don't believe they're the female, so they are their own worst enemies in that regard, and that's something I'd like to see change.
Well, we have the opposite problem here in Mexico. Exactly the opposite problem.
I know. That's why I'm mentioning it. You have a very different problem than we do.
Man, we cannot understand women's problem, and we are constantly trying to diminish and trying to make it invisible. And actually, women in my country are the ones who are actually making the change.
That's good. That's really good.
Not men.
Right.
Men, we are in the opposite spectrum. Women are doing legislation. Women are doing science. Women are fighting for their rights. And men, we are only seeing from a couch and trying to say no.
But isn't it true? Let me ask you a question. I know what you're saying, but isn't it true? Isn't it very true that you and I have both encountered people, men and women, both in your country, who work very hard to make sure that other women don't get a chance? And I'm speaking of university professors that we've worked with. I use the word professor with air quotes. University lecturers who we've encountered. But also, this is a problem that I see with the narco culture. Women are their own worst enemy in that they invite their demise by exalting the narco culture. And it's a culture of hierarchies. So whoever's the top girl gets all the benefits. So they will claw each other and diminish each other so that they can, and marginalize each other so that they can be at the top of that narco culture system. So you can't tell me that all the women in Mexico are all working for each other, because they're not, just like they're not in the United States.
Obviously not, but the only ones who are doing it actually women.
Right, right. The only ones working for reform are women. There you go. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah. Well, we need to understand this phenomenon. Whereas in gender studies, they talk about how we embrace the culture because there's no other option.
Right.
And some women where I live, and most of men, they embrace the culture and say, okay, this is what I need to do to whatever, to be good with the system.
Right.
So it's very understandable that there's women who embrace the culture of narco culture, maybe.
Yeah.
Or
not maybe.
And everything was related.
One of the most. I was going to say, one of the most distressing scenarios that I've seen that I think makes the problem that you're talking about very clear is a situation I observed when I was in Chihuahua. Not Chihuahua the state, Chihuahua the city, the capital. And as you know, there's an indigenous community of people who live up in the hills, up in the mountains. And very often the women are down in the city begging for food and begging for money from strangers in the city. Yeah. Even though that community of indigenous people are given money every month so that they can live. Now, it's obviously terrible, and it's obviously a welfare system that doesn't work at all. But what happens is the men take the money that they get for the family, because they're in charge, and they use it for drugs, gambling, and prostitution. and the women have nothing, and the children have nothing. So the men use it all for themselves because they get it, because it's their money, and their families suffer because talk to me a little bit about that, because that's a problem I think we understand to a little extent here, but we don't understand, on the street begging for food, children starving as a problem.
Yes, you're talking about other very sensitive subject. We're talking about not only gender. We need to think in order to think about ethnicity. Mexico, we're a colony. Remember? Well, you're a colony too.
What? What's a colony?
What is a colony? I know. We're a colony, and we live. Actually, we live in a colony right now.
Yeah.
So we have an extreme problem with racial discrimination. Mm-hmm. So if we put together gender and ethnicity, there's a lot of women who live in the last part of the chain. Yeah. not having any chance to have their basic human rights.
That's right.
Sure. So any people, any women, any men who are working in criminal investigation need to understand this. We're talking about these bigger issues are related to one crime. Maybe one crime that you're having, one case. Because if you don't think in those terms, you're not doing proper investigation. Your bias are going to take off, and the bias are going to try to solve the case.
Well, when you start believing or disbelieving someone because of their gender or their race or any other thing like their belief system, anything like that, that's going to cause a problem. What do you think if there was a new Supreme Court ruling yesterday in the United States? It got handed down. It said that if there's evidence of racial bias in the jury, in the jury deliberations, that's a reversible error. Do you understand what that is? Would you care to comment?
Yes. So you have a jury system.
Yeah.
We have this. We don't have that. We have a group of
judges
who do it.
Right. It's a judicial panel, 3 or 5 people.
Yes. So that's very important because that opens to these bigger issues that we are talking.
Right.
Now it's going to be part of how we do investigation, how we present things, and how we understand violence. Because if you need to understand that, if not, the bias can be an argument in a trial.
Yeah. It depends. So when you're formulating your arguments and when you're presenting evidence, you have, and your experts are even testifying, if race, gender, religion, anything like that is an issue, it has to be dealt with or acknowledged. Otherwise, you're not really demonstrating your expertise. You're not really demonstrating your understanding of the problem. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And that puts, because we put like, where are we going in the forensic community?
Right.
Where we're trying to first understand the basic protocols. What do you need to do and what not? But now we have a new challenge to understand the sociological problems that are related to the appliance of these protocols. And this is the future.
Well, this is so in terms of our motivational typology, then we have to understand, one, whether or not the crime itself is racially motivated, whether the crime is racially motivated, or in terms of victimology, whether or not the victimology affects the way we examine the case. What's that? It looks like a folder.
That forensic victimology. Yeah. Forensic victimology. That's your book.
It's part of my book.
It's part of my book. And the other part is Jody Freeman.
Exactly. I cannot tell you how helpful it's been over the years to have her as a sounding board. And I've worked with other females as well, other female investigators, other female forensic analysts, behavioral analysts. And here's an important thing I'll leave people with. As a criminal profiler, and I say this very often, it's better to work as part of when you're doing an investigation, it's better to work as part of a team. And that team, the people that you have around you, should include women, because very often the crimes that you're examining are crimes against women. And if you don't understand essential victimological elements, you're going to miss them. There are males who do forensic examination, whether it's crime reconstruction or criminal profiling. They demonstrate some of the deepest ignorance about the practices of females that I've ever seen, whether it comes to things related to menstrual cycles or human sexuality, or what the contents of a woman's purse mean. They have no idea what these things are. They're a complete mystery. And they make inferences and assumptions that are completely false because they lack a female over their shoulder saying, "Oh, that's what that is," because they don't even know the women in their own life.
Well, that's because they're ignorant.
Yes.
Because gender problems, they are sociological problems.
Yes.
They are not individual problems.
Right.
So maybe I'm thinking in the woman I think they need to exist, and not actually the woman who exists. Maybe he's more similar than me than I want to acknowledge.
Right.
And that's we need to work in that, because ethnicity, gender, and class, obviously.
Well, let me leave with this thought. The biggest problem that I see as a threat to having an honest, genuine, and helpful understanding of gender and inequity in criminal investigations and in the justice system is that we tend to take our own problems, our own issues with gender bias, our own relationship problems with our family, with our sisters, our mothers, and our wives or our girlfriends, and we tend to project them onto the victims that we encounter. And in an extent, consciously or unconsciously, we punish them for it.
Of course.
Comment. Give me
we want, and we talk about this in Aguascalientes, about what's the motivation of gender crime. And we talk about a very easy way to explain that is like the aggressor, the attacker thinks that the world needs to be in certain way.
Right.
You know?
Yes.
Has their place in the world.
Right.
It needs to behave in specific ways. And if they don't, it's their right to put it in that place again.
Put it in their place and it often, what that means is denying them access to resources, denying them access to justice, and saving the good and the hard work that you're going to do for people who deserve it. Basically deciding who deserves to get justice, who deserves to get your investigative attention, when that's not how you should be conducting yourself at all.
That's right. So maybe we want to talk a little bit. We are going to have a meeting in June in San Carlos.
That's right. We are. The International Association of Forensic Criminologists will be having their annual meeting in June in San Carlos, Mexico, which is in the where tell people where that's located. Across from the Baja Peninsula.
Está cerca de Hermosillo, en el Sonora. Está a 1 hora y media de Hermosillo, a 2 horas y media, a 2 horas de Ciudad Obregón. It's going to be hot.
Yeah.
It's going to be beautiful.
Yes, it is. Yeah, we'll post an announcement about it. We'll post some of the photos you took, which were very unfair, as I'm working very hard on our textbook here while you're taking what's obviously a vacation. So I'm not resenting you, but I feel a little biased. Like maybe you deserve some punishment. Maybe maybe I'll deny you justice subconsciously. Who knows?
Well, maybe in the future.
Not now. So tell me why you think International Women's Day is important.
Well, I will talk a little bit in Spanish because I want to address my fellow Latin American
okay.
En México, la violencia contra las mujeres es un problema importante. Ya tenemos que dejar de tener este discurso.
That's right.
Decimos que la violencia contra las mujeres no existe o que existe en la misma medida que los hombres. Mañana es el Día Internacional de la Mujer, no hay nada que celebrar, es un día de conmemorar. Y para conmemorar lo que tenemos que hacer los hombres es callarnos. En este momento decidimos hacer el club, Brent y yo, para hablar un día antes, porque un día después creo que no tenemos que hablar los hombres, tienen que hablar las mujeres. I'm saying that there's nothing to celebrate in International Women's Day. We need to think about these bigger issues and make a knowledge and give voice to the women who are dealing with these problems.
Yeah, I am astonished at how men still treat women in the United States and around the world. But it's not just that. It's how we view them. And now I'll just end with this thought from my point. In my country now, we have a real problem, which is that we have elected a president who views women as possessions. They have a shelf life. He likes women who look a certain way and who act a certain way, and he doesn't care about their intelligence. He doesn't care about he thinks of them as property, and he talks about it. And we can tell this not because of what he says when he thinks people are listening, but because of what he says when he thinks no one is listening. The conversation and the way he talks about them in general, it's extremely condescending and it's extremely objectifying. Now, these are problems because it sets up an archetype for a relationship that, one, women think is normal. It normalizes it, this gender bias. But two, other men see a person in a position of total power acting this way, and it emboldens them to think and act the same way themselves. And that, to me, is a big problem. And I, once again, find myself in a position of having to apologize for the behavior of my country as it relates to yours.
Well, we have some comments. But
Yeah.
following that logic, we must have protocols not only for the murders of women.
I saw that, yeah.
Have a specific protocol. Kids, yes.
Thank you. That's exactly right.
That's right. We need protocols, and actually, we have those protocols.
Yes, we do. Here's the best part about this. I was giving a lecture on victimology to a group of students, about 20 of them, and there was a guy there from the Coast Guard, and he said, man, when I started taking criminology, I thought this would be an easy A, but what you're talking about, it's starting to sound real hard, like there's actual work involved. And he said it legitimately. He said it like he was being completely honest, like it was a thought that just occurred to him that he was going to have to study to understand the subject matter. And I'm like, yeah, it is. It's for serious professionals.
Yeah, so that's right, Cortázar. We need protocols for each one of specific problems. I want to say hola to Carrie Gates. Carrie Gates, I mean. She speaks a little Spanish, and she says hola.
Hola.
Marcela Corpo says, the Mexican justice system is permeated by corruption and historical macho behavior. Yes, you're totally right. And Angela Canal says, Spanish please. Bueno, Ángela, vamos a tratar de hacer estos encuentros con más español. Vamos a tratar de hablar español y tratar de hacer pausas para que hablemos un ratito en español y luego en inglés. Saludos, Arturo. Arturo is watching us, so we can say hi to Arturo.
Yeah.
Troy Mosley is agreed.
Jeff.
So thank you all for.
All right, thank you as well. And Aurelio, thanks again for joining me this week. We'll talk again next week, but we're going to put a link. I want you to put a link to the venue in San Carlos and the dates for the ABP meeting, the IAFC meeting coming up in June, so people have that, okay?
Okay, I will.
All right, thanks a lot, my friend. I appreciate the talk.
See ya.
See ya.